very much for that kind introduction. I'm not going to talk for a long time. I think this is more intended to be a conversation with some of the folks that are invested specifically in the wild salmon implementation policy. But I'll just say a few words perhaps to help frame some of the conversation. I also do want to start by acknowledging that this event is taking place on the traditional territories of the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. So we're here today to talk about the wild salmon implementation policy, which is the product of very extensive consultations with British Columbians over a long period of time. And it lays out a number of strategies to work towards the recovery and the maintenance of healthy and diverse wild Pacific salmon stocks. The protection and recovery of wild Pacific salmon is something that's very much important to me, and certainly has been a priority for me since being appointed to my current role. I've been Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and Canadian Coast Guard only for about 8 months now. And I think I am the first Minister of Fisheries and Oceans from the West Coast in about 16 years. I think the last one was actually Herb Donegal. So addressing some of the issues that are facing wild salmon require attention to a number of different areas. It's not simple when you think about some of the declines that we're seeing, particularly in Chinook stocks, but some of the other stocks as well. And so let me just talk a little bit about some of those areas and some of the things, some of the steps that we've started to take over the course of the last little while. First and foremost, it's about science and about research in order to actually make good public policy decisions. I think, as most of you know, there was no department in the Government of Canada that was more significantly impacted in terms of scientific capacity and capability over the course of the previous decade than this department. And so the government has made a very, very focused and very clear initiative that's focused on actually rebuilding that capacity. So significant investments in hiring of scientists, for example. That obviously takes time to restore the capacity that used to exist within the department. You all, given your interest in this particular topic, probably know Peter Ross, who was a senior DFO scientist for many years and was part of the reductions that took place. We were very fortunate that the Vancouver Aquarium and Oceanwise actually found a role for Peter and actually started to do a lot more in the scientific area than perhaps they had done before. But you don't replace somebody who is a leading world expert with 30 years experience overnight. And so the rebuilding of that capacity is underway, but it certainly does take time. It's also about resources for science. So particularly things like stock assessment, to make sure that we actually really do understand where we're at with respect to stocks, what the trends are, that will again help us to enable good public policy decision making. We in British Columbia on the salmon side do an incredibly good job in sockeye. We do probably less with some of the other salmon stocks. And so making further investments in the capacity to be able to enable good stock assessment is really important. In the fall economic statement that happened a few months ago, we made a commitment to about $110 million to implement the new Fisheries Act when it moves through the Senate and achieves royal assent. And a good chunk of that money is actually focused on stock assessment. And then finally, just more broadly, science and answering some of the questions that we don't fully understand right now. So one of the issues that we do not well understand is why the returns of salmon from deep ocean have been poor over the past number of years. Certainly, some of it almost certainly has to do with changing ecological conditions associated with climate change, but we don't understand it very well. And I was at the port last Saturday, I guess it was, where we, in conjunction with partners in Russia, Japan, Korea, and the United States, sent a group of 21 scientists on a Russian vessel out to the deep ocean to do some of the scientific work to help us to better understand what actually is happening out there, again, to help to inform good public policy decision-making. The second area is appropriate fisheries management. So thinking about what should be done with respect to recreational and commercial fisheries associated with the various salmon stocks that exist. That's not just in BC, that's also with our American partners. Certainly Alaska and Washington State are very relevant to this conversation. And so the Pacific Salmon Treaty and the work that's being done under that is also extremely important. Thirdly, habitat. which I know is the focus of a lot of the conversation that will happen today. That starts with maintaining existing habitat, which we simply can't afford to see more habitat destroyed going forward. We need to think about the way in which we're actually addressing industrial development. So I know one of the topics that's probably fairly live with a number of you in the room is the whole issue around the part of the Fraser, the three islands in part of the Fraser, which are extremely important from the perspective of female salmon. That is something that we are very concerned about. I know many of the ministers in the provincial government are very concerned about that, and we are working towards a resolution that will allow us to see that habitat remain intact. It also is focused on restoring impacted habitat, and that certainly requires resources. And so we have brought to bear resources to enable many organizations to actually be part of partnering with us to do habitat restoration. That started with the Coastal Restoration Fund, which was a $75 million fund. In the fall economic statement, again, a few months ago, we made a commitment to a new salmon restoration fund, which is $100 million over the next 5 years, which again is focused on partnerships. The British Columbia government will be contributing more money to that. It will be a joint fund. They have not yet secured internally the funding, but there will be an announcement, I would expect, in the relatively near term to address that. And I also made an announcement a week ago about funding under the Canada Nature Fund for species at risk. And species at risk focused on 7 critical watersheds in Canada, one of which is the Fraser watershed, with a focus on things like Chinook and steelhead and sturgeon. Fourthly, it's the appropriate use of supplementation, so hatcheries, and thinking about how that can be an enabler and in what context. Certainly, we've made additional investments recently in funding for hatcheries, particularly for Chinook, in the context of finding pathways to ensure that there is sufficient food available for the south resident killer whale. And then fifthly and finally, it's about adaptation. We all know that climate change is having a significant impact on ecosystems and perhaps on aquatic ecosystems more tangibly than what we see on the terrestrial side. Certainly on the East Coast, we've seen significant movements of different kinds of aquatic life in different areas just as a function of the changing water temperatures. But here, with respect to salmon, there was a period during this summer where the Fraser, parts of the Fraser, shallower parts of the Fraser, got to over 21 degrees Celsius. Well, that's a real challenge for cold water species like salmon. And so thinking about how do we adapt to some of these things that are not going to get better, they're probably going to get worse, at least in the short term. So things like cold water refuges, about how do we think about water flow and the use of water, and how do we actually, again, do more scientific work to help enable potential solutions to address what is going to be a critical challenge going forward. All of these require partnerships. It certainly requires an active partnership on the part of the federal government and the province of British Columbia. The federal government has responsibility for the marine-related ecosystem, but the province has responsibility for land management, for water use, for mining and forestry-related activities, and agriculture. And so all of which can have significant impacts on fish habitat. And so it does require a coordinated approach. Too often in the past 20 years, irrespective of partisan stripe, there's been too much of each government looking at each other and saying it's your responsibility. And I think one of the things that we do need to do is try to align the work that we're doing to ensure that we're actually making the right decisions and prioritizing the right things, irrespective of whose jurisdiction it is. It also means that we need to work closely with our American partners, and I would tell you that the government of Washington State is very committed to the issue of salmon, which is positive. There are times when our friends in Alaska aren't quite as easy to work with, but it is important that we're actually working across boundaries to try to address some of these issues. And then finally, it's partnerships with local organizations like you folks. In British Columbia, we are very blessed by the fact that we have so many local volunteers that are invested in these issues, that are willing to give up their time and their energy and sometimes their financial resources to be part of trying to find pathways to success with respect to setting. So I wish you well, certainly today, in the discussions that you will have. We welcome very much your involvement, your input. I think a number of staff from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans are here to engage a conversation about how we can help you and how you can help us, so that collectively we're making the right decisions and doing the right things to help enable recovery and maintenance of salmon populations in Bruce Island. So thank you very much for the invitation.